Will not surrender to the mob. Take a listen.
All I can say is that whilst it is concerning, and whilst of course it does make me thoughtful, and I may need to change tactics slightly, but I'm going to make one promise to you and the tens of thousands watching this live, online, and the media, and my promise is this: I will not surrender to the mob. I will not stop campaigning. This democratic process must continue.
Richard H. joins me now to react to that. He's a protective security specialist and the author of the Close Protection book. Well, Richard, what's happening here? Because we've got MPs increasingly targeted. We know about Joe Cox, of course, the tragic death as well of David Amess. We've had MPs' homes targeted. We've had MPs' offices targeted. Nigel Farage has had a milkshake thrown at him last week and now pieces of concrete. What's going wrong here?
Hi, Camilla. Yes, indeed. And let me begin by saying these acts are wholly unacceptable. And whoever is found guilty of such offences must be brought under the full weight of the law. When we have a situation where you have the principal, the person being protected, has a need to go out and mingle with the crowd, generally speaking, these crowds are unknowns to the protection team. And by coming into close proximity, you are raising the element of risk in being attacked. And the situation is almost impossible for those conducting protection. Now, when you make a comparison between the government protection teams and the private sector, what you have in a planned event in terms of the general public and the media and so on, everyone knows that a certain person is going to turn up and conduct a speech. Then the government can put in certain elements to mitigate and control those risks. They can swamp the crowds with officers and have preventative measures and reactive measures in place. When you have a comparison with the private sector, it's very much dictated by the budget. And so when you have the likes of Mr. Farage, where the budget can be very restricted, you have a situation that is extremely difficult to control and mitigate. And there has to be a process where risk has to be a certain element of acceptance in terms of what are the dire threats that we are facing. So, for instance, bladed weapons. And ultimately, when you have your life at risk from serious injury or death, that takes a far more precedence than over a coffee or milkshake. Now, when you have... Sorry.
I was going to ask you, Richard, I mean, in this case, the officers, they reacted really quickly and it was great to see. And indeed, Farage himself credited them with their swift action. But ultimately, do we need there to be some sort of extra protection, maybe legislatively, for MPs and people who are running for public office? Otherwise, these sorts of spontaneous acts, and by the way, this guy, I mean, he might have been planning it. He grabbed something out of a tub and just threw it. It's not like you can track fixated individuals. That's a different kind of policing. This is just people randomly attacking stuff. We've seen it with Just Stop Oil. We've seen it with Extinction Rebellion. Very briefly, Richard, don't we need to beef up the law on this?
We live in a democratic world. We live in a democracy and a fair and free society. And you can't have one law for politicians and one law for the rest of the general public. Law has to be fit for purpose throughout society. And if it's not, then it needs to be changed. What we have are adequate laws, in my mind, to deal with such instance. However, it's not a deterrent. When you have someone guilty found of a common assault, which just results in the community service and the fine, that in itself is not a deterrent for that person's 5 minutes of fame. There has to be a more concerted effort, an increased budget to provide the protection needed to these MPs and those campaigning to be elected.
Richard H., thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.